Now that you've posted, let's begin part 2 of chapter 2. Let's talk about the attachment theory. Now, there's one problem we have when we start categorizing communication, feelings, or emotions, is that we try to put ourselves into a category, but that may not necessarily fit into that one category. We can have different attachments with different people. I might have a secure attachment with my partner, but an insecure attachment at work. Or I might have different relationships that have different attachment styles. So when they talk about attachment theory, they're talking about predominantly, but realize that there's still a dynamic nature to attachment that is based on relationships and how we communicate with others. The secure attachment, individuals are low in anxiety and avoidance. You like being around the people. You reach out to them. You're not anxious around them. You're good. You're comfortable. And you seek closer ties to people that you have a secure attachment with. The preoccupied attachment is high in anxiety and low in avoidance. They desire closeness, but they are plagued by the fear of rejection. Now you can think about this happens in certain parts of a relationship, especially when we get to romantic relationships. You may have a preoccupied attachment early in a relationship that later becomes a secured attachment once after you get to know the individual. Dismissive attachment, low on anxiety and high on avoidance. They view close relationship as comparatively unimportant, instead prioritizing self-reliance. And over here now you can see the model. And like I said, you're not tied to just one box. You may be in different boxes depending on the relationship and how you communicate within those relationships. Fearful attachment, high on anxiety and avoidance. They fear rejection and tend to shun relationships. So when you're doing a self-reflection, you can kind of put yourself into a category and realize, okay, predominantly I try to avoid everyone. I don't want to be around anyone, and I have high anxiety when I'm around someone. Well, you might have fearful attachment. However, when you get to know someone, that can change. But you need to be reflective upon it, saying, when I try to communicate with someone, I have to be aware of my attachment style so that I know, okay, I'm going to have anxiety going in and talking to this person. I know I'm going to want to avoid it. But to get that pay raise, I need to do it. So you end up reflecting upon it so that way you can address it. You can go towards the ideal self. Culture becomes very important to us. We have an entire chapter coming up soon on this. But when you start to reflect, you need to realize that how is your culture impacting you? You know, culture is a powerful source of self and is established, coherent of beliefs, attitudes, values, and practices shared by a group. And that means when you reflect upon how you're going to communicate with someone else, you need to understand, okay, in my culture, I expect to make eye contact. And if they're not making eye contact with me, I need to stop for a moment and start looking at them and realize maybe it's not part of their culture. Presenting yourself, how we present ourselves both publicly and privately, is based on culture. And then who we mirror growing up oftentimes comes from culture. Now, when we really start to talk about self-perception and how we communicate, we have to realize there are three things that we need to consider. First is the face, which is what you want others to see and know. It's a self-construct. I want to be seen as happy and joyful, so my face is, I'm going to present this to the world happy and joyful. Or I want to be stern and tough and rugged, so that becomes a face. That's a self-construct. That's the ideal self that you're trying to present to the world, so that way when they look in the mirror, It's coming back that the people are perceiving you the way you want to be perceived. Now, a mask is different, is your face totally designed to hide who you are. It's a case oftentimes we will see with athletes that they don't want to be seen as greedy, or they don't want to be seen as, partiers or something of that variety. So they put on this face of, oh, well, I'm always on team meetings and doing all these public things, but that's not really who they are. So they try to veil who they are, to hide themselves away. And so when you have a face and a mask, the face, you really don't lose. The mask, though, can sometimes slip. And that can be a large source of feelings of shame, humiliation, and sadness. When this upright citizen is found out to be a crazy partier and has done a bunch of illegal things, their face as a civil servant falls away, or their mask falls away, and you see them for who they actually are, and that can cause trouble for them. The relationship self, relational social penetration theory, Shrek. All right, come on. We all know about the onion, right? We're complex, we have multiple layers. And on the outer layer, the social penetration talks about our age, perhaps other trivial things about what is your major in college, your hometown. Those aren't very deep information. It's stuff that we share with pretty much anyone. When you're filling out a census or you're opening a new social media page, that's the stuff you put out there with no problem. There it is. Now, that outer layer, there isn't much vulnerability to it. Someone might make a wisecrack about your hometown, oh, you're an old guy, type of thing. It's okay. My age is something I am, and I'm not going to be able to change it. So it's a peripheral layer. Now you get a little deeper, and you're talking about the intermediate layers. And these are the things that when people start rejecting it, you start feeling a little sting, a little hurt. It might be something as musical taste. I mean, if you say, oh, boy, I hate jazz music, ooh, that hurts. I like jazz music. Why would you say such a horrible thing? But it's not too deep of a cut. It's just a little bit. Political beliefs, leisure interests, If you sit down and you want to talk to someone about science fiction movies, and they say, oh, I hate those, I love dramas, then you might not really start connecting with them, and they'll modify your communication with them. Now, when people start getting into the central layers, that is when you become more protective. That is when you start sharing that, you're becoming vulnerable. If you say something about your beliefs or your values, or you share your fears with someone, you expect them to have an importance. And if they don't, then it hurts. Self-awareness, self-concept, self-esteem, all these are in that central layer. And then there's the hidden self and the revealed self. And how much you hide is dependent on where you're at on the relationship. How much you share in communication is based on how vulnerable you feel you can be with a person. If on the outer layer, they're knocking your hometown and your age and the other aspects of the peripheral layer, you're not likely to really share your values or interests with them. Instead, you're going to change how you communicate with them. Disclosing yourself to others. Now, as we mentioned before, on computers, it becomes so different. Social media has changed this. Computer-mediated communication has modified how we share information. Self-disclosure, sharing of private information. Normally, in the face-to-face, in relationships and communication, we only disclose private information based on our relationship with a person. I think we've all had the moment where you sat down on a public bus or on some type of public area, and someone comes up and starts telling you stuff that you're like, TMI, too much information. I really don't need to know this. I just met you. And that's going to change your perception of them and how you communicate back to them. Interpersonal process model of intimacy, how we feel about others in a relationship, is based on self-disclosure and how they respond. In other words, if at work you find another coworker that you can open up to, you become friends with them and you communicate differently with them than you do the boss that you feel, oh, I can't tell them how I feel because they just expect me to show up for work. So this will impact, as you're doing self-reflection, how you're communicating with others. Know how to share, disclosing yourself. If you're going to tell someone about you, if you want to communicate your self-reflection, you have to know yourself first. Are you trying to put up a mask and hide your face? Or are you actually pulling back the mask and showing your face? Or is it even deeper than that? Is there an aspect of deep self-reflection and your authentic self is becoming out? Know your audience. You know, the poor guy on the bus next to you probably really doesn't need to know your intimate personal details for the 5-minute bus ride. Your audience may not be perceptive, may not want you to be an open onion. You know, the tears caused by the open onion may not be what they want. So know your audience. And it's not a exchange that you're going through. It's not, oh, I've opened myself up, now you tell me your deep dark secret. No, it's a case of, if you've chosen to communicate to someone different, deeper layers of yourself, don't expect them to do the same, because they may not be in that place or they may not wish to. So don't force others. Don't presume gender preferences. When you're talking to a person about relationships, just accept them as a person. You know, you don't say, oh, well, I'm going to go talk to Sally because Sally, being a woman, will be more sympathetic than Tony, who's a man who's not going to be so. No, don't presume that one gender has a trait that the other doesn't. Instead, accept the person as a person, not as gender. Be sensitive to cultural differences. If the person in their culture, they don't open up, don't force them to open up, and don't, reveal that your deeper inner self to them when they're not used to that. So be careful with that. Go slowly. Don't, in the first 2 minutes, become the onion with no layers. Go slowly and let the feedback, the communication, drive how much you expose. Now, going back to Rogers, what he talked about was there's different ways how we listen to others. And we need to be reflective on this for ourselves and in order to set an ideal communication. Conditional regard, which is conditional positive regard, is offering a warm, respectful acceptance only when the other fulfills a particular expectation. I will only approve of this, like, favor if you do this for me. And that's not what you want in relationships, a conditional regard. Oh, well, I will only be happy with you if you get an A in the class. No, that's not the expectation. The expectation should be you accept a person for who they are. Unconditional negative regard, I think we've encountered a few of these in our life where it's a, hey, I don't care what you do, no matter how well you do it, I will not be happy with you. Nope, no way. And if you're a person that falls into where you're always in negative regard of another, then you need to say, wait a minute, I have to change that. I have to modify that. These are all talking about when we're reflecting upon ourselves, how we can become a better communicator and how we can become better in our interpersonal relationships. Disregard, just not there. You have no perception of them and you're kind of just totally indifferent. you've disregarded the relationship. And if in a start of a communication, if you're just going to disregard the person, is that a communication you need to go into? What Carl Rogers really wanted us to strive for was unconditional positive regard. It involves feelings of acceptance for the person. We don't judge them based on what they've done. We don't make them painful or fearful. We're not defensive. We just accept them as a person. It means caring for the person as a separate person and allow them to have their own feelings and their own experiences. And you just listen to them in a positive nature. And if you can do this in a relationship where you're communicating with someone, where you're communicating with your spouse or your significant other or a family member, even a sibling, if you can just accept them and listen to what they're saying without saying, oh, well, I remember back in 3rd grade, you tore up my homework and I got an F on the assignment, and ever since then I just can't listen to anything you say. No, you want to just put that behind and let them have their own experiences and feelings. So what we really wanted to cover here in this chapter is how we consider ourselves, our self-esteem, our source of self, and relationship self. We really need to be self-reflective in communication, because we need to understand, if we go in and we say, oh, I have no biases and I have no prejudices, and boy, I am just the best thing ever, guess what? You're going to have a hard time communicating. You're not going to see how you're coming across to others. So you have to take a different perspective. You have to reflect upon yourself and say, okay, is this who I really am, or am I putting on a mask to hide who I am so that way others will accept me, and if that's how I want to live my life? So when you go out into the world, make sure you're being reflective, because if you know more about who you are, it's easier to communicate with others, and it's easier to build those relationships that last and that are important. And once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, message me, contact me. I want to make sure this is working for you. Follow along in the book. The lectures, I'm trying to expand out from the book, not just stay on the book, but introduce other concepts, so that way you can get more of an overall picture.